Yeah, hello everybody, and thanks a lot for having me here. I will simply just start with my talk. Designers should learn how to code. Now, what do we do with that? Um, when I started in the web design industry about 15 to 20 years ago, things looked a lot like this. So you had people that were responsible for the design, then you had the front end and the back end development. And I was a designer back then, and to me, it felt a lot like this. So it was designers on the one hand, and then there were the developers on the other hand. And as a designer, you quite often heard things like, well, what you're doing there, this is not print. And you just don't know how the web works. So this is not possible. We cannot do this. And you should just learn how to code, and then you would understand how the web really works. As a designer, on the other hand, this felt a lot like you had your expectations of how something should look, but reality was quite a bit different. And you just had your work, your beautifully crafted Photoshop layout back in the days, and you gave it to some developer, and then it came out quite differently. And they just told you, well, this is because you don't know how it works, which led to designers being angry and sad. So at this point, the designer asks himself, what can I do to make reality look like my expectations? And you had, and this is kind of still true, sadly, today somehow, you have your design tools. I already mentioned it has been Photoshop for a very long time, then people started to use other tools like Sketch. Nowadays, most of the designers I know use Figma, but there's other tools as well. But whatever tool you use to craft your layouts, you have to find something else to make your reality look like your expectation. And what is that? And the answer to that is, well, you need to do some development, some programming. And of course, you will use to do this the programming languages that are most visual, and that is HTML and CSS. They are strongly connected to the visual world, much more than JavaScript, TypeScript, whatever. So this, in my experience, was some key element why designers started to learn how to code, and they learned a lot of HTML and CSS. And with this, over the last years, a new profession kind of evolved that is in between design and front-end development, and it is called Frontend Design. This term is coined by Chris Coyier, I guess. Sometimes it's referred to as UX engineering or as interface development, but it all means just the same. And I will pull down some labels here of what you all need to know and need to achieve when you build a website. And we will come to this later as well. So this is all kind of a flow, and you start on the very left-hand side where, of course, you do some things that are clearly belong to design. So things like illustration, photography, all of this stuff. And then it goes on to more user interface design, user experience design. And as I mentioned, these developers do then a lot of HTML, CSS, also accessibility and stuff. Not so much JavaScript frameworks and presentational JS, all this backend stuff that belongs to clearly the development world. And so we have these people now that do design and a tiny bit of development. And I want to show you how valuable they are in your daily work. And I want to show you this by giving you a little example. So imagine you have a designer, and this is a designer, and he is given the task to design a headline and 2 paragraphs. That's very simple, just design a headline and 2 paragraphs. one of the paragraphs has a link in it, and that's all. So, well, he says, yeah, that's not too hard. I can do this. So he comes up with this. You have the headline and 2 paragraphs. Perfect. Now he hands this over to a developer, and here's our developer. Her name is Getty, for no special reason. And well, he uses, the designer used Figma, so she can use her inspect tool and take a closer look at the headline. And what she sees here is, okay, the text has a name. It's called Text for XL. She sees the font family, the style, the font size, line height. And also the color has a name. It's called black. And she knows all of these things, and she sees, okay, yeah, I can translate this to some utility framework. And in fact, these are all things taken from Tailwind, the CSS framework. It's a utility-first framework. And when she translates this to code, all she has to do is take the properties that are given in the inspect tool and put all this together, and well, after that, mostly she's done. So she goes to the designers as well. What you've done here, it's simply perfect. It made my life so much easier. It is really great. So that's one way things can work. But now let's have a look how another designer might approach all of this. So he's given the same task, like do a headline and a paragraph, and yeah, nothing else. And he thinks, well, okay, if I just have a headline and a paragraph, this could be a tiny bit boring, so let's spice it up just a tiny bit. So he comes up with this layout here. It's again auto, headline, and paragraph. And yeah, there's one link in there. And again, our developer comes around and has a look at the headline. And here, what she sees is quite a bit different. So we have like, okay, the headline doesn't have any, it's not named in some way. Font family and weight and style are kind of the same. The font size looks a bit odd. It's 158.91 pixels, and the line height is also a bit strange. And the color, she says, okay, I think this is black, but I'm not really sure if this is really pure black. And well, then she goes to the designer and says, we need to talk. But here's the thing now. Sorry. Our developer here, Getty, she has a background in design. So she started as a designer as well. And she looks at this, and because of all of her background stuff, she says, well, this simply looks awesome. This is really great. And I will do this. And I will make this happen. I will make a website out of this. Now let's see what she's doing here. First, when you look at this layout again, try to see, okay, what is important here? What makes this layout so special? And I think there's 3 things that come to mind. First of all, have a look at the headline. The headline is like really huge. It's not about readability here. It's kind of a graphic instrument. It's a substitute for an image. So the designer really wants the headline to scream at you. So it's really huge. That's one thing. The other thing is about the width of the paragraphs. Here it is quite different. It is about readability. So you have a nice amount of characters per line so that you can read the 2 paragraphs. And the last thing here is the layout itself. I don't know if you can see this here, but it's not completely centered. And this is not a mistake. This is intention. And so it's a little bit to the right. And also the paragraph itself, of course, is not lined on the left-hand side with the headline, but to the right. So this is a kind of special layout that we're having here. And now let's dive into the code and address these things one by one. First, we have a look at the headline. The headline was roughly 160 pixels. Don't remember these a little bit odd values, just rounded up. So it's roughly 160 pixels. But instead of using pixels here, what we can do is we use another unit and we use viewport units instead. So for the headline, this looks like this. We have a calculation, we have 1 EM, and we add a lot of viewport width units to this. 1 EM is here to make sure it doesn't get too small, but most of it is sized using viewport units. And that's it. With this, the headline always is really huge, regardless of what the browser window size is. So the next thing is the width of the paragraph here. It's 720 pixels. But, okay, again, 720 pixels, I don't want to use this. Instead, I will paint here a number of zeros, and this is 50 zeros. And these are in the same font family, font size, and font weight as the paragraph itself. And why is this? Because we can, now that we know it's 50 times 0, we can use another CSS unit that is called CH. So instead of using a max width of 720 pixels, we can use a max width of 50 characters, 50 CH. And 1 CH is always the width of the character 0 in the given font family and font size and font weight. So if for some reason the font is not loaded, or you change your font during your brand development or whatever, it will always still be roughly 50 characters per line, and it doesn't depend on the font family that is used. So that's really great and quite resilient. The last thing is the layout itself. And have a look at the columns here. It's 114 pixels, 230 on the left, and 344 here in the second column. And as you might already have guessed, I will try to not look at the pixels again, but try to find a relation between these columns here. The relation, if you look at this again and say, okay, 114 multiplied by 2 is roughly 230, and multiplied by 3, it is roughly 344. So it's 1/3, 2/3, and 3/3. And another thing that is important here is that these 3 columns are mostly occupied by white space. There's nothing in there except for the headline that is partly in the second column, but the rest is white space. And distributing white space is something that you can do really good with a CSS grid. And this looks like this. So we have an outer container that gets this class like fancy text, and you give it a display grid. And then you use grid template columns, 2FR, 3FR, auto, and 1FR. And the FR unit here says that whenever there's space left, distribute it like this. Put 2 parts of it to the first column, 3 parts to the second one, and 1 part to the last one, to the fourth column. And well, that's it. You now simply have to place your elements onto the grid. So the headline, the H1 here, starts at the second column. The first one would be on the far left-hand side, and it ends at the fourth column. And the paragraphs start at the third and end at the fourth as well. Putting this all together, we get a CSS that looks like this. So there's also, I also added some margins, the line height here, but you can see for the outer container, we have the grid calculation here. Then we have the headline that has a font size with a lot of viewport units in there. And for the paragraphs, I also added a font size with a tiny bit of viewport width in there as well. But the important part here is the max width of 50 characters. And with this, we get a responsive layout that is responsive without the use of any media query. And the most important part, it preserves the intention of the designer. and I will show you how this looks. So here we can see that the three things that I mentioned, the headline is always really, really huge. It is always as huge as possible, depending on the browser width. You can always have very nice reading line length for the paragraph. And as soon as it's possible, the paragraphs get indented to the right, and you have the columns get filled with these white space. Here's another video where you can see how the columns are distributed over here. So this is how this works. And I think this is great, and this could be done because our developer, remember her, Getty, she knows some visual stuff, and she gets the idea of the designer and knows how to translate this to a real website. And these are kind of here, you can again see her skills. Now we have to see how can people that know all of this stuff, how can they work together with all the other people that are working on a team? And it could be quite easy because there's a lot of companies that are searching for so-called full-stack developers. And if you read the job ads for a full-stack developer, what you have to know is all of this. So it's quite a lot. And to be honest, I'd love to hire someone who knows all of this. It would be perfect. In my personal experience, it is a lot more that a full-stack developer is much more interested in this stuff here. And you see, it can happen that there is no overlap. And what I fear, what can easily happen from here on is that you have something that is more like this. So you have what used to be the designers on the one hand side and then developers on the other hand is now designers on one side of the field and then the front-end and back-end developers on the other side. And you hear a lot of discussions if you go to Twitter and see if you should use CSS framework, if you should learn how to write CSS. All of this is based on these opposing groups. And I would strongly recommend that if you look at your team and if you build up a team, especially when you want to build a functional design system, make sure that you always have people that intersect at some point and know how the other people work. And if you want to fully place this, look here that there's a lot of people that really understand not only their field, but also the field of the other people they're working with. For example, on the far left-hand side here, you see someone who's the white square here is someone who really only knows the design stuff. And they are still really valuable. But if you now then have another front-end designer who also understands design, they can communicate with each other and understand each other. And this can lead to a really good web application, website, design system, whatever you want to build. Yeah. And that's it from me. Thanks again for listening. If you have, after the event today, any questions, you can find me on Twitter. And as I already mentioned, there's the website. That's the German ichimnetz.com. And I'm working at 9 Elements. We're a web agency based in Bochum in Germany. Thank you very much.